Order. I call to order today's House of Commons Defence Committee evidence session on the work of the Secretary of State for Defence. May I say it's a pleasure, Secretary of State, to have you back in front of our committee. Thank you very much for making yourself available. And it's also a pleasure to welcome David Williams, the Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Defence again, and also General Dame Sharon Naismith, the Vice Chief of the Defence Staff. A very, very warm welcome to all of you. And at the very outset, Secretary of State, may I first of all thank your good self and the Ministry of Defence staff for their cooperation with respect to the various classified and secret briefings that have been provided to us at the Ministry of Defence building, and also the cooperation for the various visits that we have had within the UK as well as abroad. And can you also convey to your ministers for making themselves available for providing regular in-brief briefings to myself as and when there are significant developments, especially international developments. So please do convey that on behalf of our House of Commons Defence Committee to your team. But having said that, I have got a bone to pick to start off with, which relates to the information that is available to the committee. Now, Secretary of State, you'll be aware that during our first interaction back in November of last year, 7 months ago, you rightly said that you want a new relationship with Parliament and with this committee, and you wanted to increase transparency and the flow of information that is provided to us. However, there have been various examples where unfortunately that standard has not been met. Now I can illustrate that with a few examples, if you will. Firstly, we've got the Permanent Secretary here with us. We were promised to have a current headcount of the department and the plans to reduce it, including plans to reduce the number of generals, admirals and air marshals. To date, we have not received that as a committee. Secretary of State, your good self promised to share with the committee the latest Armed Forces Continuous Attitude Survey. We've not received that. General Sir Rob McGowan, he promised to provide information on the percentage of fighting force that was represented by the 10,000 personnel deployed in 50 operations around the globe. We unfortunately have not received that either. And there are several other examples, let me also bring to light our evidence session, Permanent Secretary, in December, where you promised a note on the precise recruitment pipeline timeliness, as well as Capita's recruiting pipeline, as well as a note on the Annington Homes deal. We unfortunately have not received that. In addition, the DENS war game with industry. The reason why I'm rattling off several examples, Secretary of State, is that I know you are committed to transparency and providing information. However, you can, I think, feel the exasperation and frustration in my voice on behalf of the committee that for over 7 months we have not received those various things. And it's also my understanding that the information is ready to send to us. Unfortunately, it is being held up on account of clearance at some point within the MOD. Do you think that that's acceptable, and what can you do to change that?
Well, it's very good to be with you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your welcome, and to your committee members. Thank you for the passion, the expertise, the challenge that you bring to defence business in the House. You had invited me to say a few opening words, Mr. Chairman. Perhaps I'll come back to that later, but let me try and deal with the series of points you've put to me at the outset. First of all, of course, I'll pass on the gratitude of the committee, the recognition that over this last year of the classified and secret briefings that you've had, the support for visits, and I hope that at least the longer serving members of the committee will be able to draw a distinction between the level of information, the level of cooperation, that sort of degree of briefing that your committee now has access to compared to previous defence committees that certainly Mr. Twigg served on, and how the government at the time and the department dealt with them then. I assume that you've written to me with a compilation of all those points that you've now raised. It hasn't...
Basing on a fortnightly basis.
If you've written to me with that compilation you've just put to me, then I apologise because that's not yet come to me, and I will respond to that immediately. But just to say to you on one or two of these things, the Armed Forces Continuous Attitude Survey, the latest version was published in May. That's available to you and your committee, just like it is to us. On the deployed personnel around the world, the most recent figures that I looked at, compared to November, I think you cited the 10,000 from General McGowan. It's somewhere over 8,500 in 38 countries on 50-odd operations. Of course, we can give you, within reason, and with the caveat for clearly special forces and other very highly classified operations, we can give you what data we can on that. And if you've been waiting for that for 7 months, I apologise, and I hadn't realised. And likewise, the recruitment data, if you've been waiting 7 months for that, well, the data you would have got in November has been overtaken by the progress we've made. Still a lot further to go, but I'll make sure that you've got that recruitment and retention data, because that hits to the heart of our ability to deal with the recruitment and retention crisis we inherited after 14 years when, I have sorry to say, the previous set of ministers set recruitment targets for each of the services and missed them in each and every year.
Secretary, I appreciate that response, but it would be good to get that in writing so that we can effectively do our work, because otherwise it really hampers our ability to get rid of the backlog and move forward in a meaningful way as well. But also, more generally, it has been discussed about more strategic, long-term things, namely the equipment plan. It was also agreed that last year's annual MOD report and the annual session with the Permanent Secretary, that we're still awaiting that, and likewise with the annual shipbuilding update. All of these things were discussed, and by the way, the annual shipbuilding update, that's 2.5 years ago. We are still none the wiser about that. I know my good friend Geoffrey Clifton Brown and his Public Accounts Committee have raised those issues when our member Derek Twigg was guesting at that particular committee. That issue was raised then as well. When do you think that these things will be received, and why are things taking so long? And what can you do to change that?
Well, you asked for a more strategic view of what, as a new government with a newly elected mandate and a different vision, a new vision of defence to respond to the new era of threats that we face. We published a month ago today the Strategic Defence Review. That sets the vision and the framework within which we will now pursue the reforms that are already in place and we need to take further. We'll develop the policies that we need to develop, and we'll reinforce the warfighting readiness of our armed forces. So that gives you the strategic framework as a committee, and I no doubt you'll want to come to this, within which this Defence Department and this government will work.
That SDR is good as an overarching document, but it's the detail that committee members would be more interested in terms of the equipment plan stuff, the accounts. I think the SDR would never encapsulate things such as the shipbuilding update. Those things are things that we need the facts and figures so that we can see progress with regards to what has been promised by government. Hopefully you can appreciate the nuance of that.
I think your committee members will also appreciate, particularly those elected for the first time a year ago this week, that the details of plans that might have been the responsibility and the publication of previous ministers and a previous regime is really rather less relevant than the decisions that we will be taking now within and have already taken in this year and will take in the future now within the framework of the Strategic Defence Review. In terms of the annual set of report and accounts, that was essentially the report and annual accounts that mark the end of the previous government. I mean, if the committee wants to question me on them, I'm happy for you to do that. If you want to do a session where you question officials on them, of course you can do that. And then as far as the accounts and the decisions that we've taken as a government, they'll be reflected in the annual accounts and report in the way to come, in the normal possible way. So, but they will reflect in the way that the current doesn't. The fact we've got a £5 billion boost to defence spending this year. That in 2 years' time, this is a government and this is a country that we're spending 2.5% on defence for the first time since 2010.
Good. Well, look, now that I've got that off my chest and we've got certain things on record, and I hope that we will be able to get the information, and I thank you for your clarification that is something that you will hopefully get actioned as soon as possible so that we can have that information. Let's now move on to the NATO summit.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Before we move on,
I
mean, let me apologise to you and the committee for those bits of follow-up that have been stuck in the system rather than with the Secretary of State. It's not good enough, and you should expect better. It's not consistent with a very clear direction from the Secretary of State, from the ministerial team, about the importance of timely transparency to Parliament, to this committee. Frankly, for some of them, the answers when they came back weren't very good, so we've been around the buoy, and then there just becomes a question of their relevance. But I'm happy to follow up on that list with the clerk and get you answers to those questions, some of which will have moved on, as the Secretary of State says, over the course of the last few months, not least with decisions made in the SDR, some of which will be fleshed out later in the year through some of our SDR implementation work. But I'm happy to commit that we will come back on those outstanding questions in the next couple of weeks at the latest.
I thank you for your commitment, Mr. Williams, and it's my job on behalf of the committee to make sure that our committee is accorded that due respect and prioritisation by the MOD to ensure that on behalf of Parliament and the British people that we can do our job. But let's move on, Secretary of State, to the NATO summit and defence expenditure. Can you please update the committee on last week's NATO summit? I know the Prime Minister made his statement in the House, but specifically on the financial commitments agreed by the UK.
By all means, Mr. Chairman, will you permit me a segue at this point to do what you'd invited me to do before the committee, to offer a few opening remarks, not least because you said the committee wants detail, and I can provide a list of the detail of the ways that this is a government and we as a ministerial team and department been delivering for defence over this first year in government. And starting with the strategic defence review, because that will set the nature and the framework for the exchanges that you and I and your committee will have in the coming years of this Parliament. It represents a generational shift to our approach to defence. It represents a determination to move to warfighting readiness in order to deter the threats that we face and strengthen the Euro-Atlantic security. It is, if you like, the plan for change for defence. It's a plan to step up and lead in NATO. It's a plan that learns the lessons from Ukraine. It's a plan to boost British jobs, British business, British innovation right across the UK. And it's a plan that puts, for the first time for a long time, our defence people at the heart of our defence plans. And this is the way that we'll make our armed forces stronger. It's the way that we will make the British people safer. You may want to come on to the broader questions we face at the moment, but just for now to say we welcome strongly the ceasefire between Iran and Israel. We welcome the reports of a potential ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, and we are working to support those, and we await news of developments. But I say to the committee, on day 1,224 of Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine, we cannot lose sight of the war in Europe and the fight that the Ukrainians are having to defend their own country. Now, in terms of the year that we've had, I would say to you and the committee, Mr. Chairman, we've been delivering on the manifesto commitments that we made on defence this time last year. The SDR published 2.5% defence investment, 3 years earlier than anyone expected. A Germany-UK defence agreement signed within 100 days. An EU-UK security pact agreed, a national armaments director, post-established, recruitment well advanced, a military strategic headquarters already now established and operating, an armed forces commissioner, legislation passed, recruitment underway, NATO test completed within the 100 days, and Ukraine support stepped up to record levels now in the UK, with at least £4.5 billion in military aid in this year alone. But in terms of detail, Mr. Chairman, we've gone further than that, delivering for defence, signing nearly 800 major contracts to support thousands of jobs since July, agreeing with NATO allies to spend 5% of GDP on national security by 2035, buying back 36,000 military family homes from private hands to public ownership, reversing probably the worst privatisation in history undertaken in the dying days of the 1996 Conservative government, investing £7 billion this Parliament to fix forces housing, including an extra 1.5 billion for forces family homes, building a new £50 million UK-wide support system to ensure we've got support for veterans, awarding our forces personnel last year the highest pay increase they've had for nearly over 20 years, and following up this year with an inflation-busting pay rise as well. So I can sit before this committee, Mr. Chairman, as the first Defence Secretary who can say no one who serves our forces in uniform will now be paid less than the national living wage. And none of this would have been possible with the most amazing people I have the privilege to work with day in, day out, military and civilian alike, from directors to desk officers, from service chiefs to chefs to coders. And I'm grateful to them all, Mr. Chairman. I'm grateful to them all. Many roles, one defence.
Good. Well, look, thank you for that overall perspective, and we will be going in detail into each of those issues, and it's the committee's intention, including the Middle East developments that you've alluded to. So, but coming back to the NATO summit, are there any other financial commitments that have been agreed by the UK that you would like to highlight to the committee? Because Professor Malcolm Chalmers from RUSI, he estimated that there is an increase in funding from 2.5% to 3.5% of GDP, and that equates to an extra £40 billion annually. So would that extra money accelerate delivery of the current SDR, or will defence's capabilities expand further, and if so, in what areas?
So on spending, and the NATO summit, for the first time the 32 NATO allies have recognised, as we argued actually in our election manifesto, we have argued in the Strategic Defence Review and recently in the National Security Strategy, we've argued that an essential part of national security isn't just what the Armed Forces and Defence does, but it's what we do on national resilience, what we do to protect civilian infrastructure, what we do for cyber protections. And if you like, it's the Article 3 commitments that all nations sign up to as part of the NATO alliance. And so for the first time, that's a 5% commitment in 10 years' time, a benchmark, if you like, as NATO describe it, for all 32 nations to see that core defence spending and that wider national security spending hit 5%. That's a benchmark that we have welcomed. It's one we argued for. It's one we've signed up to as a government.
Will the increase from 2.5% in 2027 to 3.5% by 2035, will that actually be tapered? So should we expect further increases in this Parliament beyond those set out at the spending review by the Chancellor?
So what you should expect, what the country can look forward to, what defence can plan on for the first time is 10 years of rising defence investment. A certainty and a profile which no one serving in uniform today, no one working in main building today has ever in their careers experienced. In this Parliament, we set out exactly how we will fund the commitments we've made. So the extra £5 billion boost this year, our first full year in government, the 2.5% that will be reached in 2027 by switching money directly from the Overseas Development Aid budget into defence, a tough decision that we took because of the importance of meeting the threats that we face. And then an ambition to hit 3% in the next Parliament, alongside that benchmark that we now have endorsed of a 5% national security spend as part of our NATO commitment.
Okay. Well, look, let's move on to my colleague Jesse Norman.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Chair, and welcome, Secretary of State. Secretary of State, you appreciate that this committee is a bipartisan committee, and defence has always been a bipartisan question. So I personally think it ill behoves you to make disparaging comparisons between yourself and your predecessors. I think Ben Wallace was at least as serious a Secretary of State as you are, and when you've served as long as he has, we can make the comparison. In that question, I actually did put the question to clerks as to whether the quality of responsiveness to information had improved or fallen over the last 2 years, and the answer is it's significantly fallen. So I want to say two things. This thing about responsiveness is not just about whether you filled in a few forms. It's whether you're responsive to Parliament, whether you're attending to the concerns that we have on behalf of the democratically elected Parliament of this country to exercise proper accountability and scrutiny over the armed forces. And if you're not willing to do that, then let us know. And if you are willing to do it, then give us the dates and the information by which we can expect to have the materials we've got. And we don't want to have to put date stamps on everything we talk about, but it's important, okay? So can we just mutually agree that?
I'm not looking to make disparaging remarks about the previous government. I'm stating facts and I'm drawing differences. But on the important question of any ministerial responsibility and accountability to Parliament, Mr. Norman, you and I are entirely on the same page. You have my commitment. You had it in November. If I'm falling short, and those that are working with me and for me are falling short, then I need to know we will rectify that, because it's fundamental to me that we're part of an elected government, accountable to Parliament, and you, in particular on the Defence Select Committee, have a job to do on behalf of the public and those who serve in our forces to hold us to account.
I'm grateful for that, and you appreciate, Secretary of State, what I think everyone on this side appreciates, which is it increases your authority to be responsive to accountable measures put in place and mechanisms by us. On the SDR communications, you wrote to us on the 11th of July to indicate that there had been a problem with the reading room and that was the nature of the communications failure, and that the committee had not received the documents it was supposed to have received until 12 noon, a delay of 2 hours. But in fact, the communications problem went much worse than that. There was in fact no reading room. The clerks have confirmed that to me. There should have been a reading room in Parliament where members of this committee could have reviewed the document. If we're setting a regime for the future, can you make that commitment now so there's no ambiguity? Because, of course, it's not just about this committee, it's also about the 21 interviews that ministers had with the media before Parliament itself was informed, and it's also about the personal briefings that were given by ministers or by officials to senior people in industry beginning that morning at 8 in the morning. So the question of accountability in relation to the SDR goes well beyond the letter you wrote, and the facts that you recounted in your letter were not in fact accurate. Could you revisit that?
I'm not, Mr. Norman, I'm actually not clear what letter you are referring to that I have written to the committee about this.
It was a letter that you wrote
especially that if they were, because what was in that letter would be accurate, would be precise, and what we found when we were preparing to release the Strategic Defence Review was that the department had no established systematic procedure for ensuring that those that need and should have access in advance to something as strategic and important as the Strategic Defence Review, there was no system for doing that. We did our best and interrogated the system for any record of what was done, including to opposition frontbench spokespeople and to this committee, and actually to those important stakeholders like business or trade bodies or academics or ex-forces chiefs. So I have now put in place, and I've confirmed this to the Speaker, I confirmed it in the House, I think last week, that I've put in place now a procedure and a system and I'm content to share a copy with the committee as a follow-up to this session for how in future, for major strategic documents like this, and I would anticipate this next for the Defence Industrial Strategy, and to apply for that, this committee, and then more importantly, more widely, those people leading on defence for the opposition parties in Parliament can expect to have information and briefing and potentially copies of a strategy ahead of a formal statement in the House, on the basis, of course, that they remain that confidentiality is
confidential. Yeah. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And I might ask the clerks just to revisit with your office what has gone wrong in that letter of the 11th of June. I won't read it out because we don't have time.
Well, if there is anything wrong, I absolutely want to know about it.
No, okay, we will do that. Thank you. Okay, just quick question now about spending. Is the Chagos Island settlement included in the 2.5%?
Sorry, say again?
Is the Chagos Island settlement included within the 2.5% defence budget that you've outlined for the next 3 years?
Well, as I think it's been confirmed in the House, the cost of the Diego Garcia settlement will be split between the Foreign Office and the Defence Department. The total
within the 2.5% budget that
the
we're
total
talking
cost
about.
is over £101 million a year. That's less than 0.2% of the defence budget. At net present value, the total cost of it is £3.4 billion. That, I have to say, Mr. Norman, for something that sits at the very heart of our unique US-UK defence intelligence and security relationship, where we do things together on and from Diego Garcia that could not be done anywhere else in the world, is a profoundly good investment for this country, for our alliance, and for that sort of wider security that we can help guarantee.
Am I right in thinking that Sizewell C is included within the 1.5% additional defence commitment? I.e. a civilian nuclear power station?
Well, that will have. I think we're less than a week, aren't we, since the NATO summit and the agreement. The committee will have had the guidance from NATO, because I promised to send that to the chairman ahead of this session. That, by the way, is NATO guidance, has not been published at the moment, but it gives an indication of the way that NATO is looking at definitions. It does include critical infrastructure. And the whole notion of this 1.5%, this question of national security, is a recognition really of the way the world is changing. It's reflected in the SDR, that our national security isn't just about our defensive security now. You have to take in our cyber security, our energy security, our border security, all arguably things that the public recognises as important parts of a country that is safe, a country that's resilient. So those sort of decisions will come in due course. I can't give you a firm answer now. I can only point to you what the NATO guidance at the moment has been set out.
That's helpful.
Thank a week ago.
In the spending review, current spending in MOD increases by 0.7% a year for the next 3 years. Given that defence inflation will be probably higher, for reasons we know, than regular inflation, this effectively means that the actual amount of new spending that can be incurred on readiness is going to be at least static. How are you going to fund things like the massive increase in drones that we need in order to be anywhere near meeting the lethality targets of the armed forces?
Well, many things become possible because of this record increase in defence investment in this Parliament that we haven't seen since the end of the Cold War.
Even if it's 0.7% on current spending.
Many things become possible, but not everything, and we will settle those in the detailed work we've now started to produce a defence investment plan. But on drones, Mr. Norman, you may have seen, this is an area which was very much highlighted as a autonomy, new innovation, new tech, combining with some of the heavy metal of our traditional platforms, was very much a theme of the Strategic Defence Review. So we have been able to act within just 4 weeks, and I announced that we would increase to £4 billion in this Parliament the investment that we make in autonomy in drones. That's more than double that was in the budget before. It's largely capital expenditure, and we will learn the lessons from Ukraine in being able to develop not just better and produce more drones for Ukraine, which we will do this year. We will increase by at least tenfold the drones that we supply to Ukraine this year. But we will step up the pace of learning those lessons, putting that technology into the hands of our own warfighters, because that's a big contribution to being able to make our forces stronger, more capable of deterring any would-be adversaries, and also starting to lead the way within NATO for the way that this new realm of autonomy, which I have to say, working as closely as we do uniquely with Ukraine, are probably best placed within the NATO alliance to understand and to implement.
If I may, just to supplement the Defence Secretary's comments, so for certain categories of drones, as the Defence Secretary said, actually it's capital investment, and our annual growth, real terms growth in our capital budget over the spending review period is around 7% a year. So the capital budget is growing rather higher. For those drones that might be funded through current expenditure, to use your phrase, one-way attack drones, for example, that will be covered within our munitions pipeline. We've set aside money in the SDR for munitions, always on production. So whether it's artillery shells or one-way attack drones, those will come out of that heading.
If we now move on to the F-35As, Derek Twigg, please.
Secretary of State, the purchase of the F-35A represents a change in the UK's nuclear posture. But the use of that deterrent will require the US backing. Why has the government decided to pursue this approach rather than a new sovereign nuclear capability?
You're right, Mr. Twigg, it is a change in our posture. Some have described it as the most significant change in our nuclear posture for a generation. It is alongside and additional and separate from our continuing total commitment to our independent nuclear deterrent delivered through CASD. And it is a recognition that this is a way that the UK can recognise the rising nuclear risks that we face as part of the increasing general threats, that we can step up and play a stronger role within NATO, and that we can help in this way reinforce the deterrent strength of our NATO alliance.
Can I ask, is it still the plans to purchase a total of 138 F-35s? And can we expect the F-35A to make up the greater proportion of that purchase?
So we've done nothing to that sort of ultimate 138, that 138 figure. The immediate,
when do you expect that to be
the immediate next tranches of F-35 purchases total around 27, and we will swap in the purchase of 12 F-35As for what would otherwise have been 12 of those 27 35Bs.
And when will we have actually purchased the 130?
I would expect those F-35As to start being delivered before the end of the decade.
Isn't it the case that the work share for the UK on the F-35As is less than the F-35Bs?
Is that us?
What I propose is to suspend the session very shortly, and if I could request all members and the Secretary of State, we were notified beforehand that there was going to be a vote, if we could proceed to the votes as soon as possible, and Secretary of State, as soon as yourself and a quorum of the committee is present, then we will recommence. Order. Order. We will be recommencing with the Defence Committee evidence session, and we do not anticipate any further divisions. I'm pleased to inform, so he says, touch wood. Back to Derek Twigg, please.
Secretary says, as I was saying, that I think I was talking about the work show in terms of the A's and B's, and it'll be less on the A's. Can you just say something about that? Because obviously we want to give as much work as we can to our industry.
I mean, at this stage, we're still in negotiations, or early negotiations, having just announced the decision last week with industry. I would expect it to be broadly similar. What I'm confident about expecting is that the cost of the A's will be around 20% less than the B's. But the work share question and the support for UK-based jobs is still to be finalised and determined, and I'll certainly report that to the committee as soon as I can.
If it helps, the work share that we've agreed, it's around 50%, is a programme work share. So there is UK content in every F-35, whether we're buying it or not. So the question about how much work is coming into the UK is about the overall programme balance across all of the F-35 nations.
So we go back to the figure of 138 that you hope to buy the end of the decade. Obviously you're going to buy more A's.
No, not 138 by the end of the decade.
Right, sorry.
I said our plan for the next tranche totals are 27, and that within that I'm planning now, as a result of this decision, to swap 12 of that next purchase of 35Bs for 35As.
So to come back to the question,
I expect those to start being delivered by the end of the decade. To be really clear
on that. So
and repeating
do you
myself.
not have a date when we'll have the whole 138?
No.
You don't. So I mean, at the moment, for instance, Australia's got about 90, haven't they?
But Mr. Twigg, you know the F-35 programme better than anyone. This is a programme that is going to stretch into the 2030s, 2040s, 2050s.
So at the moment, we don't have a plan for reaching that figure at the moment.
No, I'm just to be really clear. Look, the fresh decisions as a new government within the context of the Strategic Defence Review, reflecting this, as you said, a significant change in Britain's nuclear posture with the 35As, will be decisions that I take in the context of the next few months and the Defence Investment Plan, which we will complete and publish in the autumn.
On the basis of the Defence Industrial Plan and obviously maintaining a strong defence industrial base, what does that say for the future of Typhoon purchases? And what's the plan?
Well, the plan for any future Typhoon purchases will be decisions that are taken in the context of that defence investment planning process over the next few months. But you'll note on Typhoon that the Strategic Defence Review confirmed its importance, confirmed its role, and confirmed the strong recommendation which we've accepted that we look to upgrade our Typhoon fleet. And we have to recognise just how important that's been.
So we can expect an increase in the number of Typhoons being bought?
The SDR recommendations were about upgrading our Typhoon fleet. Decisions about if you like,
I'm talking about being new.
I'm trying to find a way of answering you. So the components and composition of our future combat air requirements and purchases and sequencing, which will cover F-35s, Typhoons, and any other developments, will be made in the context of the defence investment planning process over the next few months. So I can't, just to be clear, I cannot give you that answer now. So what I can point you to are the recommendations made in the SDR that I've said before will be the framework and the vision within which we will look to develop defence.
So just for clarity,
including our combat air capabilities.
You cannot at the moment give any commitments or be clear that we will purchase more Typhoons as of today.
I've made clear what the recommendation is. I've made clear the period and the process within which any decisions like that will be taken. And they won't just be isolated decisions. They'll be in the context of the budget profile that we have available. For the first time, as I've said to the committee, a certain decade of rising defence expenditure, but nevertheless some significant pressures in these next 2 years, because we're still dealing with an overhang of a previous period, without being disparaging and stating the facts, Mr. Norman, of a programme which this committee is as well aware of any, was too often over-ambitious, over-committed and underfunded.
Okay, Chair.
Thank you. I believe Martin wants to come in on the F-35s as well.
Thanks, Chair. Just very quickly, Secretary of State. So with the purchase of the F-35As, we're effectively talking about ending up with only broadly 90% of the carrier variants of the F-35s that we were going to purchase. So with this decision, which I support, does this in any way impact on the capabilities of the carriers and their ability to deploy full air wings and all that kind of stuff?
Thank you for your support for this, Mr. Martin, and note and welcome that. Look, if I can refer you again to the Strategic Defence Review, what that recommends and what that points to, and what we will started to work on already, is the development of our carrier capabilities that isn't just about the F-35s on board. It's to develop Europe's first hybrid air wing off the carriers within NATO. And so some of the more advanced capabilities are likely to be developed through the autonomy, some of the missile technology, as well as the additional F-35s that will be part of developing our carrier capabilities for the future.
Can I help?
Can I?
Yeah. So just so perhaps helps that the F-35 Alpha are going to be part of the operational conversion unit, which is actually a more effective and more efficient way to run some of our training for the F-35. So in that sense, we're not anticipating it having any impact on the operational outputs from our...
Because you don't have Bs in your training unit, effectively.
That's right. So we'll be training on the Alpha rather than on the Bravo.
Okay. Thank you very much.
John?
Secretary of State, I like you, but I also like Mr. Twigg, because Mr. Twigg asks great questions. And he asked you why, with the tactical nuclear capability, why didn't we go for a sovereign capability? Why did we go for a dual key? You gave him a very long answer, but you didn't answer that question. So could you give it another go, please?
First, we have our sovereign capability. It's CASD. It has the total determination of this government to maintain it and develop it and upgrade it for the future. Second, on the decision we've taken with the dual capable aircraft and the contribution that the UK can now make. This is an existing NATO nuclear mission. We don't need to substitute for that. The best thing we can do is to contribute to it. And that's exactly what we have now given ourselves the scope to be able to do by this decision to purchase the 35As. So I think I did say to Mr. Twigg, this is a way of the UK stepping up and helping strengthen NATO's deterrence. Warmly welcomed by the NATO General Secretary, by NATO allies and by the US as a reinforcement of the credibility of NATO's existing nuclear mission. And so for those reasons, it's a decision that the Prime Minister and I took, and that I'm glad to say within 3 weeks of the Strategic Defence Review making that recommendation, we've been able to make that decision, and we're now getting on with putting it into practice.
Did we have the option to have a UK sovereign tactical nuclear capability?
Conceptually and in theory, I guess we could. That wasn't something that the SDR suggested was a good thing to do. It's not something that necessarily would be consistent with my ambition and the manifesto commitment we've made in the heart of the Strategic Defence Review, which is European nations need to step up and do more of the heavy lifting within NATO now. The UK needs to develop and demonstrate, as we are, a stronger leadership within NATO. This is action we can take now and are taking now that reinforces the deterrence of our alliance in the immediate years ahead. So it seemed a important recommendation, an important decision to take.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And Calvin Bailey?
Sorry, thank you, Chair. There's a couple of things I just wanted to come back on. In terms of work share, the F-35As do not have a Rolls-Royce lift fan in them. So for every B that is removed from the programme, Rolls-Royce loses some work share. Can I just confirm that?
My point is that we need to look at the number of F-35Bs being bought over the whole programme through the Joint Programme Office rather than just the UK.
There's only 2 purchasers of F-35B, so reductions in F-35B as a result of the F-35 programme means that Rolls-Royce does not get an equivalent amount of work share.
The question then comes back to the fleet mix in potential further tranches of buy beyond the first 2 tranches that we have talked about.
Absolutely, and that was the follow-on question, which, General, you made mention that those aircraft have been purchased for the OCU. Makes entire sense that you'd reduce the complexity and the operating costs of the training aircraft. And there is a lingering question about the signalling of what the rest of that fleet looks like. So if we have bought them just as a squadron of 12, so it looks like a squadron of 12, it's a squadron that can only be committed to NATO because you're not buying anything else around them. So there's no air-to-air refuelling. So they are a NATO commitment or a training unit share, correct?
I think that's correct. The reason that we would want to invest in the tactical nuclear capability is so that we are making NATO more lethal.
Okay, but the reason for buying them is to reduce the operating costs of a training aircraft. That was quite clear in the statement that was released in the RAF's statement, yes. So the logic for buying them was either that you are going to replace you're trading out Bs for As.
Yes.
Your remark was that you were trading out some Bs for some As to reduce the operating costs. They're basically a training aircraft with benefits that's also the nuclear option, and you can commit them to NATO, but you couldn't use them anywhere else because you don't have a tanker or any of the other supporting
yes. Yeah.
Okay, so there is, looking at it externally, the consequence to the UK industry would be that Rolls-Royce is going to lose out, but we don't have to worry about losing out on Typhoons because there is no greater design on F-35A at the moment. Is that reasonable?
Yes, so I think what I was tripping up over was the principle of investing in a tactical nuclear capability.
Sure.
The most impactful in terms of time and who we're partnering with seems to be through the F-35A programme. So that we retain our carrier capability, we wouldn't want that to displace some of our F-35 Bravo, and therefore we put them into the operational conversion unit. I think the logic flow was like that, rather than it was a
training aircraft with benefits.
Yes, exactly.
No larger buys.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, General. Let's now move on to defence reform with Michelle Scroggum.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for your time today. What do you feel are the main challenges that we face in delivering defence reform? And I'll put that to Secretary of State first.
I think the main challenge at the outset is to have a clear vision and a sense of what needs to be changed. I tried to develop that in opposition. We've made commitments in the manifesto which we've now got in place. But in the end, the main challenge of defence reform is that it is never complete. And it requires a strong leadership right across defence, including and in particular the leaders of the 4 main areas that we've now established: the NAD Group, National Armaments Director Group, the MSHQ, the Office of the Department of State, and the Defence Nuclear Organisation, as well as the political leadership. But it has to be pursued with just relentless attention. And in political terms, it is something that brings no front pages, no photo opportunities. But it remains my view, 1 year into this job now, unless we drive further with the reforms, unless we deliver them during the course of this year in this Parliament, we simply will not do and be able to deliver what's required of us to meet the objectives in the Strategic Defence Review and be able to say to people, look, in Britain here we're investing more in defence, and here you can see the benefits, and we carry that opinion with us.
And if I can direct that to Mr Williams as well.
Well, I'd rather talk about the opportunities, actually, of defence reform. So the programme is looking at structures and processes and, critically, at people, ways of working, the relationship between the four areas of the department that the Secretary of State has set out. And I think the opportunities around much clearer accountabilities and responsibilities, around delayering of our process, simplification of our process. There is a bit of an MOD culture that if a decision is worth making, it's worth making 5 or 6 times. We'd quite like to make it once and then get on and deliver and implement. And the reform programme is really, I think, integral to that. It's absolutely integral to the delivery of the Strategic Defence Review. If you think about the ambition around investment in capability at pace to meet the threat that the country and our armed forces face. If you think about the changed relationship between the department and industry, if you think about the way in which we want to foster innovation, the kind of reforms that we're setting out through this reform programme are absolutely critical to delivering it, on the ambition in this SDR. And of course, in a reform programme, you have to make sure you've got that vision, you've got the processes right, you've got the implementation emphasis there. It's definitely about leadership, communication to make sure that the whole organisation has got it. But I think this is a great opportunity in the linkage of the SDR and reform. So it's reform with a purpose, which I think helps land it with people.
I love a good opportunity, and I love that we're being ambitious. But I think unless we accept where the challenges are and own them, we're not going to be able to deliver. And you've already mentioned the way that the MOD works. It's something that we've discussed frequently in this committee, that the current way that MOD works isn't very efficient. It's holding back a lot of our current defence. Do you think that you would be able to overcome that with the reforms that you're going to put on the table?
So let me give you a practical example. One of the things that we will do is to move to for our major investment decisions, move to a single approval. Now, some of those approvals, because of their nature, will need to be approved in main building by ministers with senior input. But in that case, the case will come straight up with appropriate scrutiny and support, rather than going through an approval in a frontline command, approval in defence equipment support, in the DIO, in our DWS, at the 2-star, 3-star, 4-star level. It's about collapsing and simplifying the process. It doesn't mean that there won't be engagement between the 4 areas of consultation, but being really clear about who the decision maker is, making sure they've got the evidence and the information they need to make that decision. But both the downward empowerment, but also the upward escalation when we hit blockers, I think defence reform has got as good a chance as any of the reform programmes I've been involved in, and we are already making progress. There are tangible signs of progress since we moved to the new structure in April, and our people are feeling it, and that is different.
Thank you. Secretary of State, you've described the defence reform as Parliament-long programme. How far along
You've
described the reform as a Parliament-long programme.
Yes.
How far along do you feel that we are in the programme? So what aspects are complete and what aspects do you see that remain to be done?
Well, we're 1 year along. We've made some major structural, really serious major organisational changes. But we've now laid the foundations, and getting the wiring between the 4 major areas is important, the horizontal links. To be honest, we're all sort of politicians, we're all political leaders. We strive to be able to say things in ways that people who aren't specialists can understand, and the real challenge for me is twofold. this can become a question of organisational structures or management speak very quickly. And unless, for me, we hold one of the principal purposes of this reform, which is to get better, faster kit in the hands of our warfighters, in other words, what we want to achieve through that in mind, then we won't succeed. And unless we can make the changes that mean people's contribution to doing that is easier and different, not just the titles and the obligations and the performance metrics of the very senior people, then again we won't. So what I see as really important foundations, we've now got, instead of each of the service chiefs having their own investment budget to make investment decisions, that's in one budget now with the National Armaments Director Group. Instead of it taking, for instance, an average of 6 years to get to the point of contract for major platforms, we've specified for major platforms a reduction of that as a target to 2 years. We've similarly reduced the targets for those sort of upgrades like weapon systems or spiral development of radar systems and comm systems to 1 year. And for those things that we need to be able to use commercial exploitation to and get into the hands and into defence more quickly, a target of 3 months. And to make that really specific, we had, right, in what might be called the sort of lethality, which essentially is part of the autonomy area, we had 27 different overlapping programs in 4 different commands run by 10 different senior responsible officers. We've now got one program, one SRO, and the potential for being able to make technical specification decisions, but most importantly to be able to say, take procurement decisions that are in the round rather than fragmented, and to draw in industry who've got the capability of creating solutions that we can't necessarily, with all due respect, either in the Department of State or in the military necessarily come up with. We certainly can't do it as politicians. We've got the chance to do things differently, we've got the chance to do things better, we've got the chance to do things quicker with that purpose that we're here to strengthen our armed forces. And part of that is getting better kit more quickly into their hands that keeps up, in particular with the accelerating pace of technology. Because if we don't do that, we can see from the way that Russia, China, Iran, our potential sort of adversaries, those that combine to threaten us, they are doing that.
You've mentioned the National Armaments Director, and you've also said that it'll help defence become an engine for growth, something that I really appreciate within Barrow and Furness, that is something that's actually working there. How much priority do you expect the Director to give to developing UK defence industrial base whilst making the acquisition decisions?
It will be a hardwired major criteria in any investment decisions that we take for any of the capabilities or technologies that we purchase on behalf of the British taxpayer. In other words, and this committee has probably heard me say it before, we will look to direct more of the British taxpayers' investment in defence towards support for British businesses, British jobs, British innovation, British technology.
To be appointed?
So we've got the post established. We're well down the track with recruitment. I would hope they would be appointed and confirmed publicly soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Want to move on? Is it helpful if I
Yes,
share
General.
reflection? Because having been in the organisation for longer than I would admit, it does feel very different on this reform. I've said for a while, and this is a personal reflection, is that the thing that we need to really fix is have a balanced programme. That's what the SDR and the Defence Investment Plan will help us do. And then sort out the way we deliver and we operate as defence, and that's the defence reform. And I quite frequently say, on our watch, this is the opportunity to miss, because we have to do it now. So we touched a little bit on the SDR. From the defence reform perspective, the 3 game changers, which we have not seen in previous attempts to change our operating model, So the first one, and I know I'm amplifying what David said, but we've never been clear about who's the decider. So being really clear about who decides and then how that flows through the organisation is a very tangible shift which we feel already. So literally who's the decider. Secondly, it's the relationship of the CDS with the chiefs. It's about an integrated force. We're very good at doing that operationally. We've been less good at doing that about our future force, so force design. That's what will feel very different. And then, of course, the National Armaments Director. I mean, from my perspective as a chief, what I care about is having the capability in the time frame that I need. I want to have an industrial base that means it's resilient, and frankly, I don't want to worry about doing that. That's what is a game changer from a NAD perspective.
And to keep all of us up to the mark, including me, I'm appointing to a new post of strategic advisor and head of review and challenge. In other words, to take the lessons that I think worked well during the strategic review process of bringing in external experts, but with a very specific review and challenge process, that Malcolm Chalmers will be joining us from RUSI to play that role in that new post. He will reinforce the policy muscle of the department. He's a one-man intellectual powerhouse, to be quite honest, on defence, but he will in particular become the head of review and challenge within the department. To me, not just advising me, but challenging me, but also to leaders in the main areas as well.
Can I also get an undertaking from yourself that we can have a post-appointment session with the new permanent National Armaments Director, please?
You absolutely have my undertaking to that. Good. And although I don't at this point want to tell them that in case it puts them off,
right.
But I'm sure they will welcome it.
Thank you very much. I'm sure they will. Also, just to say that there's quite a lot of ground to cover, so my request to members is to please make questions as succinct as possible, and also to our esteemed panellists to make those responses as incisive and as concise as possible. And a perfect example of that is Lincoln Job.
Just on the back of the defence reform and the drive to speed things up, obviously getting defence export licences has ground to a halt pretty much within the last 12 months. It's much, much slower. Defence companies in my constituency tell me. Would the department, as part of the reform reorganisation, consider making a bid to take the granting of defence export licences in-house under the National Armaments Director, so that the export side of NADS's job is made quicker and more efficient?
You'd have to work harder, Mr. Jupp, to convince me that in principle that's a good move for this reason. There is in my view, there is a merit and a credibility in having a regime that is the responsibility of a different part of government, if you want it to be an exports licensing regime that is properly conducted. I think you need that separate from the part of government that will, from this point on, be responsible for driving and increasing this country's defence exports. Because one of the recent machinery of government changes that has been confirmed, one of the recommendations in the Strategic Defence Review, and one of my ambitions has been to create a Defence Exports Office. That is being set up. It's being set up in defence, and it will be composed of great people from DBT, experts from within defence. It will link with the network of representatives we have right across the world, but fundamentally it will enable us to reflect the reality of the world now, which is that many nations don't simply want to be high status customers buying kit from us. What they're looking for is a partnership and a defence and security relationship. And so therefore at the heart of this needs to be a government relationship. And my experience I've reflected over the last 12 months is that for the really big potential export campaigns, run with British produced kit, the role of ministers, the role of government is so much greater than I think I'd appreciated, but we have to reflect that if we want to be more successful.
Thank you, Chair.
Well, thank you. Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Secretary of State, you're very committed to innovation, enhancing and modernising our capabilities. That's clear in the SDR. Part of defence reform, you've created and established UK Defence Innovation, UKDI, which you announced some months ago. And there was a press release yesterday about that. Just some detail on that, if I may. Who's that going to report to directly?
That will be within the NAD group.
And who will it report to? Will it be the NAD?
It will report to the NAD.
Directly to the NAD. Okay. And the NAD, in terms of ministerial portfolio, that I assume belongs to the Defence Procurement and Industry Minister. Would that be correct?
No, the principal accountability. Listen, in terms of ministerial portfolio and responsibility, the minister that will work most closely and that day to day will do much of the work and the holding to account the pressure on delivery will clearly be the Minister for Defence Industry and Procurement. But fundamentally, the four leaders of the NAD group, the MSHQ, the department and the Defence Nuclear Organisation, I meet them regularly. I meet them regularly individually. I meet them regularly as a group. And there is the formal accountability to the Defence Board, but there's the working strategic accountability, in my view, to me as Secretary of State.
So if you were running UKDI and you were the person in charge of that, which will be a 2-star or 3-star?
Well, we're standing up the organisation now. It'll be fully in place in about a year's time, and we'll look to recruit ahead of UK.
Okay, so not clear yet. So if you were running UKDI,
and we'll settle those questions as we go into the field. For what we need is a really first-rate leader.
And so if you were running UKDI and someone asked you a question, who do you see as your political champion? Who is the politician, elected politician, of the people in the defence team, elected? Who is driving this and championing this agenda for you?
Well, Mr. Thomas, if you were applying for the job, let's just imagine, because you've got an interest in, if you were applying for the job and we were having, say, a fireside chat about that, I would say, look, you've got an opportunity here. You sit within the NAD group. You're at the cutting edge of what our forces need. You're at the cutting edge of where the real impact on British industry and British jobs go. And this is a post that has been jointly developed and jointly announced, actually, this move by the Chancellor and the Defence Secretary. You will be in a unique position within that NAD group to have two cabinet members jointly who will look to back what you do, but by the same token follow particularly closely how well you do it.
Sure. No, we all understand that the Chancellor is very supportive of the defence agenda. I meant more within the defence team, and particularly by comparison to the American model, where DIU, Defence Innovation Unit, of the Department of Defence in America, reports and is championed by the Secretary of State, and was established and personally championed by previous Secretary of State Ash Carter. And a lot of people, when you chat to them, say that is why it had success and the ability to actually drive adoption and innovation in the US model. And there are some fears, as you will know, Secretary of State, that UKDI as a concept will be buried in bureaucracy quickly unless it has a political champion who is named and identified.
Look, I'll take that, as, if I may, as a sort of point of design as we set the organisation up, as we point the head. But simply to say, to reflect the conversation earlier with Mr. Croghan, this is bringing together what at the moment is fragmented programmes, fragmented responsibility for defence innovation. It's an opportunity to consolidate that, give it fresh leadership, and take it into areas that we've just not touched before.
Great. Thank you very much. Jesse Norman.
Thank you, Secretary of State. It's been a very interesting conversation. Just to follow up on this, but obviously the NAD, from your point of view, is going to be a powerful driver of procurement, improvement, rapidity, and change. How are you going to set up that office? Because one could have two worries, right? One would be they're just going to main building, after which the waters will close and you'll never see them again. Or the second might be that they're going to go down to DNS and somehow be dislocated from the Whitehall machine. How are you going to manage that so that they have the requisite authority but also the purpose and the drive to meet your needs?
I think the requisite authority lies in the construct of the post, the range of responsibilities within the NAD group that it has, and within that is a post that will run DE&S. So it's not somebody that will do that job at the same time. Look, in the end, it's like with almost anything, it's also about getting the right person, and I'm confident we should be able to do that.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know whether David, you want to add on that?
Just very briefly, please.
Sorry, you
I think I'm not a little too disobliging about MOD.
Combination of the right person, the team around, where the priorities are. So, I mean, you can imagine an admin spends quite a lot of time trying to run the combination of organisation of 30,000 people. I think that's not particularly what we are after. We want somebody that is making sure that the leadership team around them is delivering, but also having that strategic engagement with industry, strategic engagement internationally, for instance, through NATO national armaments directors and so on. So there's an up and out dimension that's going to be really important alongside ministers, as well as making sure that the leadership team of the various components in the NAG group are delivering as they need to.
Thank you very much. Mike Martin, please.
Thanks, Chair. So, as you know, Secretary of State, the UK, as with all other NATO countries, has to meet NATO capability targets. How would you say we are doing against our NATO capability targets at the moment, and when do you think we might meet them?
Well, you'll know the capability target horizon stretches almost 2 decades. The commitments that we and the other NATO nations signed up to last Wednesday at the NATO summit endorsed a new set of capability targets, and that will frame a major part of the sort of priorities and the focus for our decisions now in the defence investment planning process.
How well does the UK measure up against the targets?
We've not met all the targets that we've set before. The point about the targets is that they are part of defining our contribution to the NATO collective defence and deterrence, and that the point also that they stretch every nation to do more. And at this time, that's exactly what we'll do.
So, I mean, you've probably heard the same thing that we have. And, we've received briefings that some of our NATO allies are concerned about Britain's ability to meet those, particularly when other NATO allies are also failing to meet theirs. And of course, the beauty of the alliance is we all, work for each other in collective defence. But of course, if we're all falling back on our capability targets, it leaves us exposed because each one is expecting the other to step up. Could I just pick one thing from the Strategic Defence Review? And I'm paraphrasing slightly, but on the section on land power, the SDR said that we should be providing a core headquarters and 2 divisions for the ARC, which is one of NATO's 2 strategic reserve corps. How would you say we're doing on that target?
Well, first, the capability targets are exactly what they are, targets. They're designed to push and stretch. They do that with all our nations. They're doing it with us. They're an important part of our drive to transform and modernise what we can do. I don't know if General Naismith, maybe you want to deal with this particular question, but just, Mr. Chairman, you'll know that NATO doesn't publish capability targets. It doesn't publish performance against capability targets. It doesn't publish, therefore, the new set of capability targets that flow from last week's summit. But if the committee would like a briefing on the capability targets that we have accepted as in part the definition of how we will in this period ahead look to contribute more to NATO, then as a follow-up to this session in a way that it's not possible to do, Mr. Thomas, in the open session like this, to answer some of the questions that you've got.
If that could be facilitated. Thank you very much for
but
that.
on the specific, did you want to start?
Super short one.
So perhaps to reinforce that we're very clear-sighted on the commitment to the capability targets. They are absolutely to be delivered over time, and we recognise that there is risk against our ability to meet some of those capability targets. The work of the Defence Investment Plan will, of course, be to work out how we prioritise and sequence those areas of risk to address them most quickly. We're also very focused on what Sakura, of course, has said to us as the priority things that he wants us to deliver, of which the Reserve Corps is one of those things. CGS, I think, has been very clear about how his intent to deliver against that ask. And much of what the SDR talks about is how to increase lethality. And actually at his land warfare conference, he talked in some detail about his vision for how to change lethality. So less about the input structure, more about the output of effect. That's what we need to demonstrate to NATO and for other NATO nations to do the same.
Thank you. And it's actually a great segue to my last question, which is really about the philosophy of the SDR. Because the SDR is about a transformation of defence to a hybrid force and increasing lethality, and you know, I think in conceptual terms it's a great document. But in reality, with the resource profile, the inputs of course do matter, that we're really only going to realise that vision beginning in the 2030s, yet everywhere we hear from the Prime Minister and the National Security Strategy, everywhere we hear that the threat is now. You know, we are ready to be, you know, we should be ready now. We are being attacked in some domains every day now. And so I guess my question is, we've made a choice there, which is to transform our military forces and deliver effect in the 2030s, but is not the threat now. And I wonder, Secretary of State, if you could just speak to that dilemma and why you've chosen on, sorry to use a cheap phrase, but jam tomorrow rather than jam today.
The SDR sets out a vision, a transformation, as you say, for the next 10 years and beyond. You can crystallise it essentially in the planning, equipping, training, deploying as an integrated force rather than separate services, and doing so in a way that brings the power of new technology, AI, autonomy, drones, alongside the heavy metal of what we've already got. Let me segue to your question from your previous question. I would expect the capability targets that we settle in 2029, after the cycle of 4-year review, to look different to the ones we've signed up to today. Because especially with my ambition from the SDR to make the UK the most innovating European nation within NATO, we will be able to demonstrate that we can achieve some of the deterrent and defence effects that the current capability targets require in different ways.
Sure.
And it isn't jam tomorrow. The SDR is a 10-year and beyond period. And the question is, what can we do now? How do we sequence the period over that? And I think the fact that we've been able to produce the strategic review just a month ago, but we've already been able to say, right, we'll set up, and we started to do that, a cyber and electromagnetic command. The fact that we've been able to commit double the budget to £4 billion for autonomy and drones in this Parliament alone, that we can invest in this Parliament £6 billion for munitions, including new munitions factories. And I could go through a list of the decisions we've taken, the action that we can take, that we can get underway now, not in the early 2030s, but clearly we can't do everything at once.
So you'd argue there's some jam today. Thank you.
Jam and Marmite today.
Thank you very much. There's, as I mentioned, a lot of ground to cover, so I just want to make sure that all members get the opportunity. Lincoln Job, please.
Secretary of State, was the US's recent military action against Iran legal in the view of MOD lawyers?
Look, that sort of legal advice isn't public or disclosed. look, we are totally at one with the US and with a number of other allies that Iran can never be allowed to develop a nuclear weapon. The US struck those nuclear targets. We've now got a ceasefire in place. We welcome that. The challenge now, and this was part of the discussions that the NATO nations had last week, was how do we build now on that to make sure that we get a diplomatic process and lock on Iran, because as the Prime Minister has argued, in the end the only way to secure a sustainable, verifiable situation in Iran where they can't try to reactivate a nuclear weapons program is to do that diplomatically.
So if we're totally as one with the US, the phrase you just used, why can't you say publicly that you support the US's actions?
I welcome the situation we're in now.
So you're prepared to welcome the ends but not the means?
Including the fact that we have a ceasefire, we have a degraded, if not destroyed, Iranian nuclear weapons program. But the way of securing that, and the arguments that now President Trump is leading and we're supporting and other allies are, is to say to Iran, look, we need to negotiate for the future now, future for your country, but the future that involves no nuclear weapons program being re-established in your country.
And when you speak to your opposite number in the US, how understanding are they about the fact that the government haven't been able to support them publicly?
The UK and the US, as we have been for decades and we were under the previous government, are and absolutely remain the very closest defence, intelligence, security allies. We continue to do things together as two nations that no other nations do. And that relationship is very strong at a military level. It's strong at a political level across the realm of defence as well.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Calvin Bailey.
Thanks very much. We've heard about defence reform and how the governance model makes sure that someone is identifiably in charge. PUS, under this new model, you and CDS will sit as two, or VCDS will sit as two on the quad, correct?
Yeah.
Quad. Okay, good. So could you explain how the quad is functioning for strategic leadership as a strategic leadership body now, and how it interfaces with operational and security issues such as the Bryce Norton security breach?
Yes, okay, so I would describe the Quad as a leadership group. So it brings together the CDS, me, National Armaments Director, and the Chief Defence Nuclear. It's not formal governance, so we all sit on the Defence Board with ministers, with non-executive directors, with other members of the executive team, and we have a formal executive committee that is the senior sort of governance at official level within the department. So I just draw a distinction between governance and leadership. At the moment,
and accountability, critically. We heard earlier that someone is very definitely in charge now. That is something that you enjoy. So someone is very definitely accountable, and there should be an accountability process or risk management process that goes along with it, correct?
yes, and that
so
process...
Can you explain that to me?
So the risk and accountability process works both through formal governance, so how each of the areas is delivering against their plans, reviewed through regular performance information through the Executive Committee, through the Defence Board. But as the Defence Secretary has also said, we meet both individually. Indeed, we had our holding to account session this morning.
So in that holding to account discussion, meeting, you would have spoken about the risks that were tolerated or further down in the system, correct?
So the risk conversation we've been having principally at the Defence Board, looking at a set of strategic risks.
So was this a risk? Is it a risk? that would have been discussed at that board?
In terms of security of the estate, it was on our risk register.
Okay, so it would have been, so it's a strategic risk. So on your 5x5, that would be right in the red, right? And it would just be about how likely that risk would to manifest.
So it's about likelihood and consequences and about risk appetite.
Okay.
And that risk appetite becomes an important input into investment decisions through the Defence Investment Plan about the sequencing of investments that we're making.
Brilliant. So just for the lay, you've identified that the consequences of this risk manifesting are so great that it should exist on the Defence Board, therefore it's a strategic risk. And the likelihood of it's something that you manage with resources, correct?
Well, you can use resource to mitigate the impact as well as the...
Or you could tolerate it.
Yeah.
So who owns the resources that mitigate that risk in the Quad?
So, for security of our built estate, the security policy, the parameters within which the department operates, is owned by a team that reports to me within the Department of State.
It's only you appear in the Quad. So you would be accountable for either tolerating or mitigating that risk?
For our policy on security, delivery against that policy, including aspects of sequencing, then sits out with the owners of the individual bits of the estate.
So I assume in the meeting this morning you said, Secretary of State, at Bryce Norton, I have a risk that's a strategic risk that is highly likely to happen. I don't have the resources to address it, therefore it's something that you are accountable, that you have to take off my hands. Is that correct?
That's not the conversation that we had this morning. As ministers have made clear, we've launched an immediate review of some of our security issues around the built estate, particularly in the UK. The first phase of that review reported to me as the security policy owner and to the Vice Chief of Defence Staff.
The person who is responsible for it, for applying the resource to mitigate a risk. And if you can't, are you, is it risk that you would yourself carry, or is it not one that you would brief to the Secretary of State? Because I'm just trying to work out, we've got this new reform thing and it all seems like it's going well. I just want to know what the governance process looks like at the moment.
Yeah, so I'm responsible for setting the security policy. The allocation of resources to meet the parameters and the requirements set out in that policy are a matter for the 4 areas of the department, depending on who owns the estate. So in the particular example of Bryce Norton, that is an issue for Air Command reporting into the MSHQ. So there's just there are clear accountabilities within an issue, but on most issues like this, it is about the combination of those accountabilities that gets you to the aggregate picture. I haven't asked the Secretary of State to own that risk.
So you're tolerating
based on our initial findings. One of the issues that I think we will want to take into the Defence Investment Plan is the right balance between infrastructure, technology, and people to ensure that security of our built estate is in line with our risk appetite.
Just before I let this go, so to be clear then, this is a risk under the new structure because Chief of the Air Staff must have transferred this up to you through his own risk management system, and it would be a risk that you own the resources for or are tolerating the risk for, and therefore accountability sits with you. And I assume, Secretary of State, you would have been briefed of the risks that exist outside of parameters such as the one at Bryce Norton.
Look, I think it's fair to say the immediate action as a result of this was about reinforcing the security at Bryce and a selected number of other sites, of upping the state of readiness and vigilance and some of the measures on all sites. But in terms of, I think, where you're driving here, this assessing and then settling judgments around the risk and ownership of the risk, that I think will emerge from this second phase of this review that I've commissioned, which is looking in light of BRISE, in light of the Strategic Defence Review's recommendation, which actually did point to BRISE, but needs to apply across the piece, which is we need to take, in general terms, we need to take our homeland security more seriously. But that second part of the review is looking at an assessment of the vulnerabilities. What sort of assurance would we need in place to reduce those vulnerabilities and the risks? And then the specific, I suppose, governance questions, as you put them, would emerge from that.
So the governance is one
ownership
thing,
of the risk.
There you go. The important point is that risks should be assessed. If you don't have the resource or you're not responsible, they should be transferred up. The buck stops with PUS as one of the 4 on the quad that's responsible for it. And if he can't control those risks and they exist outside of his scope, he should brief you on them and you should be made aware. That's
so the debriefings on the specific incident at BRISE Norton, in terms of how we've been approaching the issue, I think the focus in the Strategic Defence Review on both the importance of the strategic base, on the threats that we face, on the importance of resilience, means that our risk appetite is not in the same place now, regardless of the incident at BRISE, than it might have been 2 or 3 years ago. And as we get into the Defence Investment Plan, I would expect resources to follow that change in risk appetite.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to Ukraine and Coalition of the Willing. Fred Thomas, please.
Thank you, Chair. Secretary of State, we've had 40 years of peace dividend and successive governments enjoying that. And so you've inherited a situation that is alarming. And you've laid out during this session lots of strategic aims over the next, as you said, 10 years to rectify that, including increased spending, etc. And I'm grateful for all that detail, and we've got that now on record. What I'd like to bring us down to is more kind of present day. So if we talk about 2025, we know how unpredictable the world is and how Russia is an unstable actor, aggressive, and willing to conduct murderous invasions with no warning. There's speculation, of course, about where they might do this next and when they might do it next. And some people think they might do it in 2029 or 2030, and some people think they might do it very quickly when we're not expecting it. And so I want to ask you about kind of today and our warfighting ability. And you described the SDR as a plan to move to warfighting readiness, which sort of tacitly implies that we're not at warfighting readiness, or of the scale you would like us to be, which I think is understandable. So my question is, if we did had to go and defend NATO's eastern flank, and I'm not specifically talking about Ukraine, it could be Estonia, it could be Finland, or any of the other Baltics, Latvia, Lithuania, whatever it is, what could we realistically field in 2025?
In Estonia, we'd already have around 1,000 troops there. An integrated deterrence and defence planning and exercising already in place with the Estonian force. And we would respond not just as the UK, we'd respond as part of a 32-strong NATO alliance. And it's that strength that has helped deter Russia from that type of action in the past, but it's that strength that needs to be scaled up now because of the perception and assessment of increased risks, as you say, Mr. Thomas, and that's what both the funding and the capability commitments that you saw in the NATO summit were all about. And it's what the commitments that we as a UK government have made as a result and alongside the Strategic Defence Review.
Yeah, so if there was and we can come to yourself there, General, now. So there's a 32-strong coalition deploying in 2025, I'm not talking about kind of future spending. And Britain, as the Secretary of State said, we've got roughly 1,000 troops in Estonia. What kind of numbers can Britain deploy in 2025 as part of their imaginary NATO coalition? What can we actually deploy? And we've mentioned 1,000 troops so far. We've got that. What else can we deploy?
So would you like to have a conversation about the coalition of the willing work?
No, just the question I'm asking you.
Okay, so I think as the Secretary of State has said, I don't think it's appropriate that I talk about the detail of numbers. But as part of the wider NATO plans, what has been asked of us in the NATO force model, we're delivering against the commitments that we need to at the appropriate scales over the next couple of years. We'd be the first to say we, of course, would be ready to fight, but we'd also say and acknowledge that there are risks in our ability to do that. And everything that we've talked about so far in the defence review and indeed the reform is about making us more lethal and stronger as part of a stronger NATO.
But Sakia has a plan for exactly what you're describing. The UK has roles to play within that plan, and if that sort of action was undertaken by Russia, that's the response that they should expect, and the UK would play a part in that.
Okay, fine.
Good. Thank you. Let's move on to Homeland Security and Resilience. Alex Baker, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you to the panel. My community, Aldershot, obviously plays a role in Homeland Defence and Resilience with the HQ of Standing Joint Command in Aldershot. So I'm interested to ask you, it was great to see a focus on that in the SDR. How is the SDR going to help better protect our critical national infrastructure?
So you're not talking about the Aldershot base in particular, you're talking about civilian critical infrastructure?
I'm talking about the national context. How are we going to support critical national infrastructure?
So I would say, I think for the first time, the Strategic Defence Review for us, certainly since the end of the Cold War, has underlined the potential vulnerabilities. It's drawn attention to what we've been seeing as an increasing pattern of threat or even attacks and sabotage, undersea cables, networks, cyber attacks, threats of sabotage on the mainland as well, and it sets a challenge to us now as a nation and as a government to be able to do that. We have a lead role to play in defence and the forces, but it's not entirely our job. We contribute to that, and that's got to be led from the centre. And that was the value, I think, of seeing the National Security Strategy follow up rapidly behind the Strategic Defence Review. And I think that starts to point the way to the challenges we've got to meet on Homeland Security.
I mean, what I really like is some idea of what this looks like in practice. How do we support our critical national infrastructure?
Hard to be specific at this stage about what it looks like in practice, but some of the suggestions that are set out in the Strategic Defence Review, for instance, recognise and recommend that we make much better use of our reservists, that we do more than we do at the moment to maintain a relationship with and an expectation of those who leave the full-time forces, to create what it calls a strategic reserve, and that we look at other aspects where there is civilian critical infrastructure and what needs potentially to be put in place if that was to come under more sustained different attack.
And obviously in the last 24 hours we've heard that the vulnerabilities at the substation at Heathrow that caused the fire actually were identified in 2018. So we've had that information for several years and we've not done anything about it. What are we going to learn from that situation?
I mean, frustratingly and shamefully, it too often has been a pattern. You could say the same about some of the lessons emerging from the COVID inquiry, where the risks were identified, but the action taken to mitigate and deal with them wasn't taken. So if that was the case, the risks were identified in 2018. I think one of the things that strategic defence, in one area, for instance, recognises is that the undersea networks and cables, there's a patchwork of different authorities with responsibility, and it recommends a greater lead role for the forces and for the Navy in particular to be able to do that. And it recommends also, which government is beginning now to work on as a result of the SDR and the National Security Strategy, for a Defence Readiness Act. Legislation, in other words, that allows government across the piece to have some of the default powers that it may need if the level of attack or the level of crisis that we were facing escalated. So I think you, forgive me, Ms. Baker, in a way you're probing an area which is early work in progress, I think is fair to say, for government generally,
sure.
As well as
it's
amongst
just useful
the
for us
SDR.
to get our thoughts on your thinking,
Yep.
you know, because it obviously is an incredibly important piece, and we're very keen to sort of understand the direction of travel, basically.
And if we circle round to where we started, one of the things that I think is so important about the new NATO pledge of 5% is that it provides that sort of NATO level focus for some of the things that clearly you're concerned about and that we as a nation haven't been sufficiently concerned about in recent years.
Yeah. So one of the other things I just want to ask you about, obviously the SDR talks about the nature of the threats we face at home and about this whole of society approach that we need to take. I mean, clearly there's a really important conversation that we've got to have with the British public, and it's good to see a commitment to have that conversation, but we've also got to not alarm the British public. How are you going to plan to have that conversation?
I mean, you've captured the challenge. You want your British public to be aware of what we're facing, to be sufficiently vigilant for themselves, and people are becoming more aware, for instance, of cyber attacks, of some of the threats they personally face, as well as the services they depend on being taken out of action. But in terms of, as Defence Secretary, I have a really central concern that the British public understands, recognises and supports better what our armed forces do. And the SDR points to this but touches quite lightly on it. And Mr. Chairman, to double back to really where we started, the continuous attitudes survey published in May had for me what was one of the most searing statistics and troubling, which is that compared to 12 or 13 years ago, the majority of those who serve, the majority of them were confident and believed the British public supported them and valued what they did. That has now plummeted in recent years, so that now just 1 in 4 of those people in uniform believe the British public supports them and values what they do. Now, I'm determined that we change that. I think we have to recognise that, in part, we have a shrinking proportion of the population who have any personal family connection with the military as we lose that national service generation and as the pool of full-time forces has shrunk in the last 14, 15 years. So some of the moves that have had little attention but for me are a high priority include, for instance, the recognition of the role of cadets and the recommendation which we've accepted that we look by 2030 to increase by nearly a third, by 30%, the cadets in this country. And I think that's a part of building a greater respect for us and understanding and I hope support for what our forces do. Is there anything you wanted to add?
Well, so I was just saying if it was helpful to describe sort of what we're doing from a defence perspective as part of the wider government work on the Home Defence Plan, so the practicalities of what we're doing. And then I'll come back to the whole of society piece. So we're practically doing the review of what our plan is, noting that it's only a couple of years ago that we did that, but that is recognising what the National Security Strategy and the SDR is telling us. So we are actively doing that so that we understand risk against resource and have the plan. The second piece that we're doing is we love to have a campaign plan, but we have a campaign that is looking at how do we assure ourselves that we understand how we would protect the strategic base outload, which would be fundamental to any deployment should we find ourselves in that position. Secondly, how do we make sure that we have the right workforce in the right place to do some of the mobilisation, and that is in a dialogue with defence industry as well. We did a force testing exercise which really understood, probably the first time for a while, where some of those risks sit nationally, which is much broader than critical national infrastructures we might recognise at all, or defence. That's the second thing we're doing. And then the third part is where reserves fit into this. I think that is part of the whole of society conversation, where reserves come into not only war fighting but also defending the nation. So looking at those three strands as part of our campaign plan. The intent being that when we get to a NATO steadfast defender exercise in 27, which is a NATO-wide exercise which will test some of our ability to do that outload into Europe, where we test ourselves.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Secretary of State, I know we're at the 4 o'clock mark, but given that there were votes, and I've got 3 quick areas still to cover, just how much flexibility do you have, please?
I have the time that you require.
That is most kind of you. I know that the members will be very, very relieved about that. And more to the point, as chair, more to the point as chair, I'm very relieved because I wanted to make sure that all the members and all the areas are duly covered. So let's move on to defence transformation with Ian Room, please.
Yeah. Maybe we should have talked about this first, because I'm very passionate about this. Because we can talk about all the capabilities and readiness and everything else, but one thing at the heart of this is our people. You know, the people that serve, the people who are in the defence industry, and it's very important. And last time you appeared before this committee in November last year, you and General McGowan told me that our armed forces would lose good people if the MOD didn't make progress on the target of offering every new recruit a response within 30 days. Could you tell me what progress you have made on that to date?
I think General Naismith can.
So I can. So there were 2 genuinely new and exciting things that we talked about on the back of a recruit and retention sprint that we did at the start of the Secretary of State's tenure. One of them was what we colloquially refer to as the 10-day, 30-day piece. And that is about offering a conditional offer in the first instance within 10 days to applicants that has done very basic eligibility checks, but is really a behavioural thing. We want you as part of our team. This is our commitment to you. And then at the 30-day point, once we've done some more of those checks, or potentially haven't yet done them, that we're able to say, so this is the date in a dialogue with them that we think you should be able to start your basic training. So it's what they want, it's what we think we can do in a time frame, and we commit to do that within 30 days. We've already delivered about 9,000 of those sorts of commitment letters. We are under a remit, and I will need to report back to the Secretary of State before the middle of August, where we should be able to do that to all of those that are eligible. We have excluded those that live overseas. There's a practicality that means that's just more difficult.
Mm-hmm. I look forward to getting some data from you, if you could tell us where you are on those statistics. Because then when the Secretary of State's back in front of us again in future, we've got some sort of metrics of what we
absolutely.
can look
Measurements
at.
of effect.
So we're doing some good progress, but we're not doing it with all yet.
Right, okay.
But we will.
Well, obviously the SDR says that people are the essential part and project of defence transformation. Talks about transformation in the SDR. What kinds of skills will the armed forces need more of in the decade to come? And what will we need less of?
It's almost a sort of $64 million question. Look, very simply, we've talked about innovation and tech. We've talked about threats now. We're going to need a wider range of young people who've got particular tech, computing and cyber skills that would traditionally we haven't necessarily been recruiting through the basic army recruitment or RAF or Navy. It's one of the reasons that I announced and we set up the direct entry cyber force recruitment, and the first group of those recruits has now started their training. They don't go through all the basics that the other services do, but it's an illustration of how we've had to recognise that we need different skills, different talents. We have to draw from a different pool, and we have to do that in different ways. This committee's always had an interest in the Haythornthwaite report. It formed part of the information on which the Strategic Defence Review drew, and it's also reflected some of the same conclusions about skills-based flexibility of recruitment, career development, but General Naismith, I don't know if you want to add anything more to try and deal with Mr. Root's basic question is what are the skills we're going to need in the future that we don't have?
I think I'll just build on what you've already said, Secretary of State. So definitely some of the cyber skills, and that's the cyber direct pathway. We recognise that we find some of our STEM-based trades, particularly around engineering, very difficult to recruit and retain. Some of the work that we've done is about a better whole total approach offer for them, and that is included as part of the financial retention incentive that we offered to engineers, which has had a very good uptick. I think the third area that I would reference that we have more work to do is around our healthcare. And we're not alone there, and we'll need to do it in conjunction with the NHS to work out how we meet some of those gaps.
Does the committee have the data on the two particular retention incentives that we introduced and its impact? Because if you haven't, we'll give you the emerging data. Well, it's engineers across the services, and then it's very particularly an army.
I could ask you a question on that, Secretary of State, but I wasn't going to, but you mentioned it. But obviously, we know particularly in the RAF, with the engineers, we offered the bounties of I think it was something like 15,000 or 1 year and 15,000 the next year to retain them. Now that's a sticking plaster, isn't it? So long term, what are we doing? What's the MOD doing so that we can actually retain those skills and attract people also into the defence sector when competing with private commercial entities?
I think when you see the data, or if you speak to any of those that have accepted the retention bonus, I think they'd see it as more significant than a sticking plaster, with respect. But it's not the full solution.
Yeah, I don't mean how they would see it. I'm just saying, well, after the 2 years, how are we addressing it in between time, so we're not like that in 2 years' time.
So you've heard me, Mr. Room, talk about needing to renew the nation's contract with those who serve. And if you start to look through the continuous attitude survey about the things that demoralise people most, or the factors that are most likely to make them think about leaving service early, very often housing is at the heart of it. Support perhaps for their partner, particularly if they're a working family. So we're trying to deal with the latter, and on the housing, it's not that, again, there is no one solution to this, but unless we can make decent housing, and in my view also the prospect of being able to sign up, serve for a significant amount of time in the forces, and realise that aspiration so many people have to own their own home. Unless we can realise that as part of the contract with those who serve, then I think we will not fundamentally deal with some of the retention challenges that have built up over the years.
Okay. Thank you very much. I believe Lincoln Job wanted to come in there.
Very quick one. Permanent Secretary, when you came to speak to us in November, you said that over the course of this Parliament you were going to reduce the number of permanent civil servants by 10%. And I just wondered, 7 months on, how you're getting on.
Yeah, I mean, look, first let me just underline the really important contribution that civil servants across defence make in a range of roles, both to supporting ministers in their responsibilities, but more generally in supporting the armed forces, service personnel and their families. The STR sets out an ambition to reduce workforce costs for the civil service by around 10% over the rest of this Parliament. That's consistent with the cross-government target around reduction in administration costs for each department, with actually a stretch to go further. The important thing in those targets is it's looking at pay bill at workforce costs rather than headcount, which gives us some more flexibility around those areas where actually we want to grow. For instance, growing cyber or digital skills, thinking about some areas where we may want to civilianise or may want to bring into core permanent civil servants contingent labour or external assistance. The numbers as they currently stand are around 55,000 civil servants. We are working through, as part of the Defence Investment Plan, a series of efficiency and productivity measures. The Secretary of State has talked about our assumptions about the kind of productivity gains in financial terms, £6 billion over the period that we will look to then invest in frontline capability. It's a work in progress. The numbers continue to be on a downward trend from a peak a few years ago of about 58,000. So we've come down by about 3,000. But there's more to go. The intention is to either publish as part of the Defence Investment Plan or alongside it in the autumn a defence reform and efficiency publication that will set out the detail there. So it's a more flexible target around pay. My expectation remains that the civil service in future within defence will be smaller, but it will be more capable, better trained, more agile, more deployable, and I think civil service careers within defence, against the kind of ambition set out in the SDR, against the investment that we have, and actually as we make a success of defence reform, it remains a great place for civil servants to work.
Thank you, sir. Chair.
Well, thank you. Calvin Bailey, please, on the infamous E7 Wedgetail programme.
Thanks very much, Chair. Defence Secretary, E7, so we were going to buy 5, then 3. They're horrendously late, overpriced. We've got one in with a special clearance, which means there's something that we don't know about. That means it can't have a normal clearance. The Americans have pulled their commitment to the programme, and Boeing appear ambivalent. Could you give us an update on where we are with the programme and the risks to it?
Yeah, Mr. Bailey, if you'll accept this, look, and Mr. Chairman, if you'll accept this, if you've got a series of questions about Wedgetail in particular, if you, rather than trying to deal with them here at the end of this oral session, if you can supply them through the clerk, then I will answer them.
Okay. I think this will be something, if we could come into the department and have a discussion about this. It was one of the things that was presented to us behind closed doors, and I don't think we've had a follow-up with it yet. But there's a pretty major risk to the programme on the basis that the US have pulled out, but I accept this might be
if that's your preference, then I'm happy to deal with it in that way.
Sure. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. And let's go on to more transparency at the MOD with Derek Twigg.
Can we come on to the defence equipment programme? And it's 300 billion of defence equipment, which we've not been effectively been able to scrutinise. It's a change in 2023 when the plan wasn't published. And obviously the investment plan, which is due to be published around autumn, I think, So could you tell us whether, I think going back to you, Mr. Williams, where you were asked a question at the December meeting last year and then at the PAC meeting about our inability to do this, and I think to paraphrase your answer was that we're looking to see how we can help the committee.
Yep.
So 7-8 months down the line, we're still looking to see how you're able to help the committee. And can I ask you a specific question along with that? Can you tell us what the forecast equipment costs are over the next decade and the value of the budgetary shortfall or surplus against this forecast? So there's two parts to that question.
Yeah. Well, look, let me answer the second one first, which is today. No, I can't, because we are about to take the conclusions from the SDR into the Defence Investment Plan work that we have set out will take place over the next few months. Against
sorry, what you're saying, no, you can't, so which question, sorry?
Sorry, to your second question.
Sure.
So, your second question of the cost of the programme against the budgetary shortfall is that both sides of that equation have changed and are changing. So the Prime Minister...
You don't know what the shortfall or surplus is?
Well, across a 10-year period against the programme of record, I don't expect there is a shortfall because we have
There is a shortfall?
No, I don't think there will be a shortfall.
So there'll be a surplus, will there?
Because in comparison to the last equipment plan that the NAO reported on, we now have a commitment to 2.5% of GDP earlier in this decade, 3% of the next Parliament, and 3.5% by 2035. So the budget has changed quite fundamentally.
I get things changed, but what you're actually saying, if I'm understanding this correctly, is the MOD doesn't have a clue what surplus or shortfall in its budget.
What I'm saying is the increase in the defence budget over the next 10 years is substantially larger than the shortfall that was identified in the equipment plan last publication. But there's not, I think with respect, an awful lot of value of comparing that new budget against the programme from 2 years ago, which reflects the plans of the previous government, doesn't reflect the direction of travel in the Strategic Defence Review or the choices that we are about to make in detail to decide how that budget will be allocated. Now, the Secretary of State has set out some of the firm spending commitments that we've made on publication of the SDR, and those will clearly be inked in, but there are a range of other capability choices that we need to make. So to segue to your first question, it's not that we have been sitting on some secret equipment plan that we haven't been willing to share. The last equipment plan...
You have, because you haven't been willing to share.
No, we haven't.
You have, because you've been saying you can't share it with us, because actually it would affect national defence.
No, if maybe the Secretary of State will want to come in...
So you actually have been.
In 2023, that was the last fully ministerially endorsed equipment plan that the department had. As we were then working through the following year, it did not get finalised because we were expecting that the government of the day was going to commit to an increase in budget to 2.5% by 2030. We weren't able to work that through. It wasn't in the end a funded commitment, and the election was called. We have then launched a strategic defence review, which has been addressing these sorts of questions around where our priorities sit, and now we're going to land those decisions against the increased defence budget that this government has committed to.
But we know the forecast cost for the defence nuclear enterprise has risen by 10 billion up to 2033. That figure was announced at the PAC.
At the PAC,
so you can
yes.
announce that figure, but not.
So we have elements of cost growth or variation in individual programmes, but the content of the equipment programme overall, how much we want to invest and which capabilities, and the sequencing of that investment, not least against NATO targets, is a matter for the Defence Investment Plan over the next few weeks. We are not only started that work, and the Secretary of State may want to talk a bit about the Defence Investment Plan in detail, but we've also started engaging the National Audit Office about how we might engage them in that work as it goes along, so that they can produce their assessment of our plan once it's published in the autumn.
So sorry, I'm finished there. So basically, you can't give us the figures, you have just said there is a shortfall because of the extra money. You can't actually calculate that at the moment. That's what you say.
Well, no. What I'm saying is that the shortfall that we identified
will be less because you've got to fund the shortfall as well. But we don't know what the shortfall is.
Well, so this is why I think it's with respect to a not a particularly productive argument, because the shortfall that we had
mine's not a productive argument. So
both sides of this equation, the content of the programme and what we're spending, are changing. So the shortfall that we previously identified was a programme that then existed against a budget that we had. The budget has changed, and what the SDR says is that we need to change the capabilities that we're investing in. So both sides of that equation will go. All I'm simply saying is that the increase in the defence budget is higher than the shortfall that we had last time round. But we don't necessarily want to spend our money in the same way as the equipment plan set out in 2023. We very specifically want to spend it in different ways. So I'm afraid it is a kind of watch this space.
So sorry, just to finish. So you say watch this space. So at what point will we possibly be able to get this information?
The autumn.
Just the autumn.
The autumn.
Yeah. And what information will we be given as a committee?
I mean, the reason you haven't had what you're used to as a sort of comprehensive equipment plan, that the NAO can do its proper assessment of that plan and its affordability, is quite simply that the last equipment plan, and you're right, Mr. Twigg, the NAO judged that to be unaffordable, as it has with 5 out of the last 7 equipment plans. But that equipment plan was a reflection of the programme of planned purchases that was derived from the last government's integrated review in 2023 and the Defence Command paper that followed. We're a different government, with a different ambition for defence, with a different set of commitments for defence in our manifesto. We had that election 6 months after that last equipment plan was published and the NAO published alongside it. We've kicked off the strategic defence review that resets our vision for defence within 3 weeks of that election and have reported a month ago. That then becomes the way that we settle our own composition of that comprehensive set of decisions about how we invest for the future. Now, in old money, that would be the equipment plan, but the defence investment plan will supersede that, and it will be different in a number of ways.
So what information will the committee be able to have in the autumn that we haven't been allowed up to date?
Would have stayed on until midnight because you'd said your time is fully.
You're losing your members, Mr. Chairman.
But don't worry, it's quality, not quantity. Thank you, thank you so much for your time. And with that, I bring the meeting to a close. Order.